The sun had just begun to rise over the vast, open landscape, casting a warm, golden glow over the rolling hills and fields of tall, green grass. The temperature was a crisp 58 degrees Fahrenheit, with a gentle breeze blowing in from the east at a speed of approximately 5 miles per hour. The air was filled with the sweet, earthy scent of damp soil and the faint, pungent aroma of gunpowder, a stark reminder of the impending battle that was to come. In the distance, the sound of gunfire could be heard, the loud, sharp cracks of the rifles echoing through the air as the soldiers on both sides of the conflict began to exchange blows. The guns being used were primarily the M1 Garand, a semi-automatic .30 caliber rifle that was standard issue for the American military at the time, and the Carabiner 98K, a bolt-action 7.92 mm rifle that was widely used by the enemy. As the battle raged on, the soldiers on the American side, clad in their standard issue M1941 field jackets and M1 helmets, began to advance across the open field, their rifles at the ready. The soldiers were arranged in a standard formation, with the lieutenant, a tall, imposing figure, with a strong jaw and piercing blue eyes, leading the charge. He was armed with a .45 caliber M1911 pistol, which he wore holstered at his side, and a pair of binoculars, which he used to scan the horizon for any sign of the enemy. To the lieutenant's left was Private First Class Johnson, a young, inexperienced soldier who was seeing his first action. He was nervous and fidgety, his eyes darting back and forth as he tried to take in everything that was happening around him. He was armed with an M1 Garand, which he held tightly in his hands, his fingers wrapped tightly around the stock as he tried to steady himself. Next to Johnson was Corporal Thompson, a grizzled, seasoned veteran who had seen his fair share of battles. He was calm and collected, his eyes fixed intently on the horizon as he waited for the order to advance. He was armed with a .30 caliber M1919 Browning machine gun, which he had set up on a tripod in front of him. The gun was fed by a belt of ammunition, which Thompson had carefully laid out beside him, the brass cartridges glinting in the morning lights. As the soldiers advanced, they came across a small wooden fence, which marked the boundary between the field and a nearby forest. The fence was old and weathered, the wooden slats worn smooth by years of exposure to the elements. It was approximately 4 feet tall and 300 feet long, stretching across the entire width of the field. The soldiers would have to navigate through a small gate, which was located at the center of the fence, in order to continue their advance. The lieutenant, who was leading the charge, carefully approached the gate, his pistol drawn as he scanned the surrounding area for any sign of the enemy. The gate was old and creaky, the hinges worn and rusty from years of disuse. It was made of the same weathered wood as the fence, and was adorned with a small, rusty latch, which the lieutenant carefully lifted as he pushed the gate open. As the gate creaked open, the soldiers began to file through, their rifles at the ready as they entered the forest. The forest was dense and dark, the trees towering above them like sentinels. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. The soldiers moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the underbrush for any sign of the enemy. The forest floor was covered with a thick layer of leaves, which crunched beneath the soldiers' feet as they moved. The leaves were damp and slippery, making every step a potentially hazardous one. The soldiers had to be careful not to slip and fall, as the enemy could be lurking anywhere, waiting to strike. As they moved deeper into the forest, the soldiers came across a small clearing, approximately 50 feet in diameter. The clearing was surrounded by a ring of tall trees, which formed a natural barrier against the outside world. In the center of the clearing was a small, babbling brook, which flowed gently through the forest, its crystal-clear waters reflecting the dappled sunlight that filtered through the trees. The brook was approximately 10 feet wide and 2 feet deep, its gentle current providing a soothing background noise that was a stark contrast to the sounds of gunfire and explosions that could be heard in the distance. The soldiers moved cautiously around the brook, their eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the enemies. The lieutenant, who was still leading the charge, carefully approached the edge of the clearing, his pistol drawn as he scanned the surrounding area. He was aware of the potential dangers that lurked in the forest, and was determined to protect his men at all costs. He knew that the enemy could be anywhere, and that the soldiers had to be constantly on the lookout for any sign of danger. As the soldiers moved through the forest, they came across a small, abandoned bunker, partially hidden by the underbrush. The bunker was made of concrete and was approximately 10 feet by 10 feet in size. It had a small, metal door, which was slightly ajar, as if someone had recently passed through it. The lieutenant carefully approached the door, his pistol drawn as he pushed it open and peered inside. The bunker was dark and musty, the air filled with the scent of mold and decay. The walls were made of cold, gray concrete, and the floor was covered with a thick layer of dust. The lieutenant could see a small, wooden table in the center of the room, surrounded by several rusty, old chairs. The table was covered with a variety of military equipment, including maps, radios, and ammunition. The lieutenant's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. He could see a small first aid kit on the wall, and a fire extinguisher in the corner. The room was small and cramped, but it looked like it had been recently used. The lieutenant could see a small, metal cot in the corner, with a blanket draped over it. It looked like someone had been sleeping there, but had recently left in a hurry. The lieutenant's mind was racing as he tried to piece together what had happened. He knew that the enemy was nearby, and that they had to be careful. He carefully exited the bunker, and motioned to his men to follow him. They moved cautiously through the forest, their eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of the enemy. The battle was far from over, and the soldiers knew that they had to be ready for anything. As the armies clashed on the blood-soaked fields, the intricate dance of war unfolded with calculated precision. The commander of the northern forces, seasoned in the art of combat, had devised a complex strategy to outmaneuver his adversary. The plan involved a multifaceted approach, with each unit playing a crucial role in the grand symphony of battle. The Northern Army's vanguard, comprising of heavily armored knights, formed a dense phalanx at the center of the battlefield. These armored behemoths, astride their majestic steeds, presented a formidable wall of steel to the enemy lines. The knights' formation was a masterclass in tactical positioning, with each man-at-arms carefully aligned to maximize the protective benefits of their overlapping shields. As they advanced, the knights' phalanx slowly began to shift to the right, attempting to outflank the enemy's left wing. Meanwhile, the Northern Army's left flank was anchored by a contingent of skilled archers, who had taken up positions behind a series of hastily constructed earthworks. These bowmen, armed with longbows and quivers full of deadly arrows, unleashed a withering hail of projectiles upon the enemy lines. The archers' fire was carefully coordinated to weaken the enemy's center, creating an area of vulnerability that the knights could exploit. As the battle raged on, the archers gradually shifted their aim to the enemy's right flank, seeking to soften the defenses and create an opening for the Northern Army's cavalry to pour through. On the Northern Army's right flank, a contingent of lightly armored infantry, armed with pikes and short swords, advanced in a series of loose, skirmish lines. These troops, trained in the art of rapid redeployment, were tasked with harassing the enemy's left flank and preventing them from reinforcing their center. The infantrymen moved with a fluid, almost erratic, motion, dashing between cover and concealment as they pressed the enemy lines. Their tactics were designed to keep the enemy off balance, creating opportunities for the Northern Army's more heavily armored units to strike at the enemy's vulnerable points. As the battle reached its crescendo, the Northern Army's commander signaled for the cavalry to enter the fray. A thunderous charge of horsemen, armed with lances and swords, swept across the battlefield, aiming to shatter the enemy lines and create a decisive breach. The cavalry's approach was carefully timed to coincide with the knights' phalanx reaching the enemy's flank, seeking to create a crushing pincer movement that would encircle and annihilate the enemy army. The horsemen's charge was a beautifully choreographed affair, with each squadron carefully aligned to maximize the impact of their collision with the enemy lines. The enemy army, however, was not one to be easily swayed. Their commander, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, had anticipated the Northern Army's tactics and prepared a series of countermeasures to neutralize their advances. The enemy's center, comprising of heavily armored men-at-arms, held firm against the Northern Army's initial onslaught, presenting a wall of shields and steel that seemed impenetrable. As the Northern Army's knights and cavalry pressed the attack, the enemy's center gradually began to rotate, seeking to bring their own flanks into play and counter the Northern Army's maneuvering. The enemy's left flank, meanwhile, was anchored by a contingent of mercenary crossbowmen, who had taken up positions behind a series of wooden palisades. These mercenaries, renowned for their skill and ruthlessness, unleashed a withering barrage of bolts upon the Northern Army's right flank, seeking to weaken their infantry and create an opening for a counterattack. As the battle raged on, The crossbowmen gradually shifted their aim to the Northern Army's center, attempting to find the weak points in their armor, exploit them there. The enemy's right flank, comprising of lightly armored cavalry, was tasked with outflanking the Northern Army's left wing and attacking their archers from the rear. The enemy horsemen moved with a swift, almost silent motion, using the cover of the terrain to conceal their approach. As they closed in on the archers' position, the enemy cavalry unleashed a series of swift, slashing attacks, seeking to destroy the Northern Army's missile troops and leave their flanks exposed. As the battle reached its climax, the two armies were locked in a desperate, bloody struggle, each side seeking to outmaneuver and overwhelm the other. The outcome of the conflict hung precariously in the balance, as the warriors on both sides fought with every ounce of strength they possessed. The Northern Army's commander, his mind racing with the calculations of war, sought to find the decisive blow that would shatter the enemy's lines and secure victory. The enemy commander, meanwhile, remained steadfast, his resolve unbroken as he strove to hold back the Northern Army's tide and emerge triumphant. The stage was set for a final, apocalyptic confrontation, as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of steel and fire. The very fate of the realm hung in the balance, as the warriors on both sides steeled themselves for the ultimate test of strength and courage. The battle would be decided by a combination of strategic genius, tactical brilliance, and sheer, unadulterated bravery. Only time would tell which army would emerge victorious, and which would be cast into the depths of defeat. The war cries echoed across the battlefield, as the two armies charged forward, their hearts ablaze with the fury of combat. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, as the two forces clashed in a spectacular display of martial prowess. As the battalion advanced, the terrain shifted from open fields to dense forests, with towering trees that obscured the sunlight and cast long, ominous shadows on the ground. The soldiers moved cautiously, their senses heightened as they navigated through the underbrush, scanning for any signs of enemy activity. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying foliage, and the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves filled the air, punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig or the soft murmur of hushed voices. Suddenly, a burst of gunfire erupted from a nearby thicket, sending the soldiers scrambling for cover. The sound was like a crack of thunder, loud and jarring, and it seemed to come from all directions at once. The soldiers returned fire, their rifles and machine guns blazing as they attempted to pinpoint the source of the enemy fire. The forest was instantly transformed into a chaotic battleground, with bullets whizzing through the air and the sound of gunfire echoing off the trees. Lieutenant Jameson, a seasoned veteran of multiple combat tours, took charge of the situation, bellowing orders above the din of battle. "Cover behind those trees. Return fire in 3-round bursts. We need to suppress their position." His voice was like a beacon of calm in the midst of chaos, and the soldiers responded instinctively, seeking shelter behind the nearest trees and laying down a withering field of fire. As the battle raged on, the soldiers began to gain the upper hand, their superior firepower and training beginning to tell. The enemy fire began to slacken, and the soldiers sensed a lull in the fighting. It was then that Lieutenant Jameson spotted a glimmer of movement through the trees, a fleeting glimpse of an enemy soldier attempting to flank their position. Without hesitation, he trained his rifle on the target, taking careful aim before squeezing off a precise shot. The enemy soldier crumpled to the ground, his body twitching convulsively as he succumbed to his wounds. The lull in the fighting was short-lived, as the enemy launched a fresh assault, this time with the support of mortar fire. The forest was pummeled by a series of deafening explosions, the blasts sending shrapnel tearing through the trees and showering the soldiers with splintered wood and shattered branches. The soldiers huddled together, seeking what little protection they could from the hail of shrapnel, their ears ringing from the concussion of the explosions. Private First Class Thompson, a young and inexperienced soldier, found himself separated from the rest of the unit, lost in the chaos of the battle. Panic began. Boyo set in as he frantically scanned his surroundings, desperate to locate his comrades. The forest seemed to have grown darker and more menacing, the shadows deepening into abyssal voids that seemed to swallow all light and sound. He stumbled forward, his rifle clutched tightly in his trembling hands, his heart pounding in his chest like a jackhammer. Just as all hope seemed lost, Thompson spotted a flicker of movement through the trees, a flash of olive drab that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. With a surge of relief, he recognized the outline of his squad leader, Sergeant Jenkins, who was beckoning him towards a nearby foxhole. Thompson sprinted towards the hole, diving into its relative safety just as a fresh burst of mortar fire slammed into the forest, sending shrapnel whizzing past his ears. As the battle raged on, the soldiers began to tire, their bodies battered and bruised from the relentless onslaught of enemy fire. The forest seemed to have become a nightmarish landscape, a realm of unending terror and chaos where the laws of reality no longer applied. But even in the midst of such bedlam, the soldiers found a reservoir of strength and determination, a primal will to survive that drove them to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The artillery liaison officer, Captain Lewis, worked tirelessly to coordinate the battery's fire, directing the big guns to pound the enemy positions with precision-guided shells. The M109A7 Paladin howitzers, with their 155mm cannon on tubes, unleashed a withering barrage of high-explosive shells, each one detonating with a deafening crash that sent shockwaves rippling through the forest. The impact was devastating, the enemy positions being systematically reduced to smoldering craters and shattered tree stumps. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the forest, the battle finally began to subside. The enemy had been repelled, their positions overrun, and their survivors fleeing in disarray. The soldiers, exhausted but triumphant, emerged from their foxholes and trenches, surveying the aftermath of the battle. The forest was a scene of utter devastation, the trees splintered and shattered, the underbrush torn and trampled. But amidst the wreckage, the soldiers found a sense of pride and accomplishment, knowing that they had held their ground against overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. As the unit regrouped and tended to their wounded, Lieutenant Jameson took a moment to survey the battlefield, his eyes taking in the sheer scale of the destruction. The forest was a testament to the brutal ferocity of modern warfare, a landscape transformed by the clash of steel and firepower. And yet, even in the midst of such devastation, there was a beauty to be found, a haunting elegance that seemed to emanate from the shattered trees and the blood-soaked earth. It was a beauty that spoke to the very soul of the soldier, a reminder of the enduring power of courage and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming adversity. The cacophony of war raged on, a mesmerizing spectacle of chaos and destruction. As the sun began to set, casting a reddish-orange glow over the battle-scarred landscape, the two armies clashed in a frenzy of steel and fire. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of smoke, sweat, and blood, a noxious miasma that clung to every surface like a malignant entity. The earth trembled beneath the feet of the soldiers, as if the very foundations of the world were being rent asunder by the clash of titans. To the north, the artillery barrage continued unabated, a relentless drumbeat of thunder and fire that shook the ground and shattered the eardrums. The cannonballs screamed through the air, leaving trails of smoke and flames in their wake, as they tore into the enemy lines with merciless precision. The defenders, huddled behind makeshift barricades and crumbling walls, returned fire with desperate ferocity, their rifles and muskets blazing in a maddening crescendo of gunfire. The sound was deafening, a never-ending barrage of explosions and screams that threatened to consume all in its path. And as the battle raged on, the lines began to blur and shift, like a living, breathing creature twisting and writhing in agony. The attackers, driven by a fierce determination to breach the enemy's defenses, surged forward in wave after wave of screaming, sweating, and bleeding humanity. They stumbled, fell, and rose again, their bodies torn apart by bullets, shrapnels, and the merciless blades of their enemies. The defenders, meanwhile, fought with every ounce of strength they possessed, driven by a desperate will to survive, to cling to life in the face of overwhelming odds. In the midst of this maelstrom, individual soldiers found themselves lost and alone, struggling to survive in a world gone mad. A young lieutenant, his face smeared with dirt and blood, stumbled through the wreckage of a shattered building, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his comrades. He called out, his voice hoarse from shouting, but the only response was the mocking echo of his own cries, bouncing off the ruined walls like a cruel joke. The lieutenant's heart sank, his spirit crushed by the weight of his isolation, as he realized he was truly alone, a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast and uncaring universe of war. Nearby, a grizzled sergeant, his face a map of scars and wrinkles, rallied his troops with a fierce cry, urging them forward into the teeth of the enemy's defenses. He brandished his rifle like a banner, its barrel still smoking from the last shot, as he charged forward with a battle cry that sent shivers down the spines of his enemies. The sergeant's eyes blazed with a fierce inner fire, a burning passion for victory that drove him forward, even in the face of overwhelming odds. He knew that the battle was far from won, that the enemy still held the high ground, but he refused to yield, refused to surrender to the crushing weight of despair. It threatened to engulf them all. As the battle raged on, the landscape itself began to change, transformed by the fury of the conflict into a twisted, nightmarish realm of ruin and devastation. Buildings crumbled, their walls collapsing in showers of dust and debris, as the artillery fire tore through the city like a malevolent force of nature. Trees were uprooted, their branches shattered and splintered, as the soldiers clashed beneath their boughs, their rifles and bayonets glinting in the fading light. The earth was scorched and blackened, as if the very soul of the land had been ripped asunder by the conflict, leaving behind a barren, smoldering wasteland that seemed to stretch on forever. In the midst of this desolate landscape, a small group of soldiers huddled together, their eyes fixed on the horizon as they waited for the inevitable counterattack. They knew that the enemy would not give up easily, that they would rally and regroup, determined to drive the invaders back and reclaim their lost territory. The soldiers whispered among themselves, their voices barely audible over the din of the battle, as they shared what little information they had, trying to make sense of the chaos that surrounded them. They knew that the next few hours would be crucial, that the outcome of the battle hung precariously in the balance, as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of blood and steel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in a dark, eerie twilight, soldiers steeled themselves for the final push. They knew that the coming hours would be the most brutal, the most intense, as the enemy launched a desperate counterattack to drive them back. The air was heavy with tension, the sense of anticipation building to a fever pitch, as the soldiers waited for the inevitable onslaught. They checked their rifles, their bayonets, and their grenades, making sure they were ready for the fight of their lives. They knew that the next few hours would be a trial by fire, a test of their courage, their strength, and their will to survive. And they steeled themselves, body and soul, for the carnage that was to come. The darkness deepened, a palpable, living thing that seemed to wrap itself around the soldiers like a shroud. The stars twinkled above, a million distant witnesses to the carnage below, as the battle raged on, a maddening, never-ending vortex of blood and fire. The soldiers waited, their hearts pounding in their chests, their senses on high alert, as they prepared to face the ultimate test of their endurance. They knew that the outcome of the battle was far from certain, that the next few hours would decide the fate of the war, and the fate of their very lives. And they steeled themselves, with a deep, primal determination, to face whatever lay ahead, to emerge victorious from the crucible of war, or to die trying. The once pristine landscape was now scarred, a testament to the brutality of war. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and blood, as the sounds of gunfire and screams still lingered in the minds of the survivors. The battle had been fierce, with both sides suffering heavy losses. As the dust settled, the true extent of the devastation became apparent. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, their limbs twisted in unnatural positions, their faces frozen in eternal screams. The medical teams rushed to the scene, their faces grim with the knowledge of the task ahead. They moved swiftly, triaging the wounded, and administering what little aid they could to those clinging to life. The cries of the injured filled the air, their voices hoarse from shouting for help, their bodies racked with pain. The medical personnel worked tirelessly, their hands moving with precision, as they fought to save as many lives as possible. Among the survivors was a young soldier, no more than 20 years old. He lay on the ground, his leg torn apart by a burst of shrapnel. He was conscious, but his eyes were glassy, his face pale. A medic knelt beside him, gently cutting away his trousers to examine the wound. The soldier's eyes widened as he saw the extent of the damage, his mind reeling with the thought of never walking again. The medic's face was a mask of concern, as he worked to stem the bleeding and stabilize the soldier's fragile condition. Nearby, a group of soldiers huddled together, their faces etched with grief. They had lost their commander, a man they had respected and admired. He had F.A. Mullen in the early hours of the battle, his body riddled with bullets. The soldiers were in shock, their minds struggling to come to terms with the loss. They had seen him fall, had watched in horror as he tried to rise, only to be cut down again. One of the soldiers, a young private, was overcome with emotion, his body shaking with sobs. He had been the commander's radio operator, and had been by his side throughout the battle. The private's eyes were red-rimmed, his face streaked with tears, as he mourned the loss of the man who had been like a father to him. As the medical teams continued their work, the casualty reports began to filter in. The numbers were staggering, with hundreds killed, and many more wounded. The survivors were in a state of shock, their minds reeling from the trauma they had endured. They wandered the battlefield, searching for their comrades, their faces etched with worry. Some were successful in finding their friends, and were reunited with tears of joy. Others were not so lucky, and were left to face the harsh reality of their loss. One soldier, a sergeant, had lost his entire squad. He had been the only survivor, and was left to pick up the pieces. He wandered the battlefield, his eyes scanning the ground for any sign of his comrades. He found one of his men, a young corporal, who had been killed instantly. The sergeant's face was a mask of grief. As he knelt beside the corporal's body, he gently closed the corporal's eyes and whispered a prayer before moving on to search for the others. The sergeant's heart was heavy with sorrow as he realized the true extent of his loss. As the day wore on, the survivors began to regroup, their faces set with determination. They knew that the battle was far from over, and that they still had a long way to go. They moved with a newfound sense of purpose, their minds focused on the task ahead. They were no longer the same men who had gone into battle. They were now hardened warriors, forged in the fire of conflict. They had seen the worst of humanity, and had come out the other side, their spirits unbroken. The commanding officer, a grizzled veteran, stood tall, his eyes surveying the landscape. He knew that the battle had been a turning point, a moment of truth that would decide the fate of the war. He was proud of his men, who had fought with valor, and had given their all. He knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but he was confident that his men would emerge victorious. The officer's face was a map of lines and wrinkles, etched by the weight of responsibility. He had sent men to their deaths, and had watched as they fell. He had made the tough decisions, and had lived with the consequences. He was a leader, a man of steel, who had been tempered in the fire of war. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the battlefield, the survivors began to reflect on the events of the day. They thought of their fallen comrades, and the sacrifices they had made. They thought of the families, who would never see their loved ones again, and the children, who would grow up without fathers. They thought of the widows, who would weep and mourn, and the mothers, who would never see their sons again. The survivors knew that they had been given a second chance, a chance to make a difference, and to bring peace to a world torn apart by conflict. They steeled themselves for the challenges ahead, their hearts heavy with sorrow, but their spirits unbroken. They knew that the fall of their comrades would not be in vain, and that their memories would live on, as a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of those who had given their all. The culmination of centuries of conflict, diplomacy, and strategic maneuvering has led to the complex geopolitical landscape we navigate today. The reverberations of historical events continue to shape the interactions between nations, empires, and ideologies, influencing the destinies of countless individuals and communities worldwide. As we delve into the long-term consequences of these developments, it becomes evident that the intricate web of cause and effect stretches far beyond the immediate aftermath of a particular conflict or era. Consider, for instance, the aftermath of World War II, which not only redrew the map of the world but also instilled a profound sense of international cooperation, as embodied by the establishment of the United Nations. This effort to foster global peace and security has had a lasting impact, with the UN playing a pivotal role in mediating conflicts, providing humanitarian aid, and promoting human rights. However, the UN's efficacy has often been hindered by the very geopolitical tensions it seeks to alleviate, underscoring the persistent challenges in achieving a unified and peaceful world order. Moreover, the Cold War's bipolar world, dominated by the ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, has given way to a multipolar world where various powers, including China, the European Union, and India, exert significant influence. This shift has introduced new dynamics, with alliances being forged and broken, and the resurgence of nationalist sentiments complicating international relations. The rise of terrorism, cyber warfare, and other asymmetric threats has further complicated the security landscape, necessitating adaptable and innovative strategies from governments and international organizations. In assessing the legacy of historical events, it is also crucial to consider the cultural and societal dimensions. The exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultures that accompanies conflict and diplomacy has irreversibly intertwined the fate of nations. For example, the spread of Buddhism from India to East Asia, facilitated by the Silk Road and other trade routes, has had a profound and lasting impact on the spiritual and philosophical underpinnings of societies across the region. Similarly, the modern era's global connect Livity has accelerated the exchange of cultures, fostering a rich tapestry of global citizenship, but also raising questions about the preservation of local identities and traditions. The economic aspects of geopolitical shifts are equally significant, with trade agreements, resource control, and technological advancements playing critical roles in shaping the destinies of nations. The Industrial Revolution, for instance, catapulted certain nations to prominence by leveraging new technologies and energy sources, while the current digital revolution promises to redefine the global economic order once again. However, these developments also come with challenges such as inequality, environmental degradation, and the potential for job displacement, highlighting the need for thoughtful and sustainable policies. As we reflect on the legacy of historical conflicts and the evolving geopolitical landscape, we are reminded of the profound interconnectedness of human societies. The actions of one nation or group have the potential to resonate across the globe, influencing the lives of people in unforeseen and far-reaching ways. This realization underscores the importance of empathy, understanding, and cooperation in navigating the complexities of our interconnected world. In conclusion, the study of military history and its geopolitical implications is not merely an academic exercise, but a vital tool for understanding the present and shaping the future. As we continue to grapple with the challenges and opportunities of an increasingly interconnected world, it is essential to draw upon the lessons of the past, recognizing both the achievements and the atrocities that have shaped human history. By doing so, we may strive towards a future where the mistakes of yesterday inform the wisdom of today, guiding us towards a more peaceful, equitable, and enlightened world for all. And so, as we close this chapter on the legacy of military history and its profound impact on our world, we invite you to join us on this journey of exploration and discovery. Stay informed, stay curious, and above all, recognize the profound role that history plays in shaping our shared human experience. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses, historical insights, and reflections on the complexities of our ever-changing world. Together, let us navigate the intricate tapestry of human history, ever mindful of the wisdom that the past offers us as we forge towards the future.